This video is going to be my second attempt to try to preview the NFL draft from a Ravens perspective and try to illustrate or describe some of the problem areas or decisions that'll be out there for the front office to make. Since Jadeveon Clowney has finally signed somewhere else officially, I felt like that was a foregone conclusion, to be honest with you. I hate to be pessimistic. I think it now clarifies how demanding the job is going to be for this Ravens front office in this year's draft. They've got to balance current needs for 2024 with future needs, depth concerns, and then the eventual just exponential growth that Lamar Jackson's contract will balloon to in 2026 and 2027. The front office, I think, is smart to try to stockpile picks for this year's and next year's draft. Maybe some of it is unintentional or unplanned with the amount of free agents that have left versus who we have signed or retained. I think it's a constant challenge, obviously, to try to reload or rebuild the roster, if you will. Already, there's still a lot of talent there from a team that went 13-4 and made it to the AFC Championship game. With the obvious positions that there are to address already, offensive line, quarterback, now outside linebacker and wide receiver, you're probably not going to see any other position addressed until that last pick in the fourth round, pick 130, or maybe even thereafter. The only caveat there will be running back, since Keaton Mitchell will not presumably return until late 2024, if at all. I would have no problem if the team addressed running back at pick 130. This video is going to include at least two paths for the front office to address those positions with different combinations of players that meet certain criteria, at least two that I'll give you here. These are guys who are projected to contribute early, if not start in 2024, then quickly thereafter, or at least contribute. Additionally, I'm trying to project these selections at realistic spots. So even though I would like to, and I'm sure you're in the same boat when you do your mock drafts, I would love to take Chris Braswell at 62, or Kamari Lassiter, or Keon Coleman be there. But they're not going to. If you take a high-level offensive lineman with pick 30 in the first round, which is what I'm going to portray here in my first scenario, there's just no way in good faith to slot down some of those other guys. With the amount of tackles taken, quarterbacks and receivers taken, sure, there's going to be good talent pushed down the roster. I push down the draft order, I should say. I do think that there is first-round level talent up to pick 45, 48, maybe even 50 because of how many offensive linemen, receivers, and quarterbacks are going to be taken in the first 32 picks. I do think there's opportunities for the Ravens to trade back up after selecting at pick 30, which I know is a little bit outside the box. I'm looking at a team like the Saints at pick 45. They don't have a third or fourth round pick. So realistically, if we were trying to move back in to double up, use our patented strategy of doubling up first round picks, which we're not going to do, but in essence, moving up to pick 45 would allow us to do the same thing. If you believe what I said, my assertion in the beginning, that there is first round talent to be had there up to pick 45, you could offer some type of package to the Saints along with pick 62 that helps them recoup draft picks, and they don't have to sit out for the entire third and fourth round and wait on their 2 fifth-round picks. The problem for the Ravens in terms of trading up, I think, is you've got 3 divisional opponents right in front of us. If at pick 49, the Bengals, pick 51, the Steelers, pick 54, the Browns. I think if you're going to try to trade up, you might want to leapfrog them to get a hold of some of that premier talent. Another team that looks like a possibility for a trade is the Cardinals. They have 2 picks early in the third round that, if you ask me, could present a slightly different opportunity once we've already selected at 62, trying to jump back in to one of those 2 picks earlier in the third round so we don't have to sit and wait for pick 93. At any rate, let's look at one projection that I think addresses 3 key positions for the present and the future. Like I said earlier, this video is going to really only focus on the Ravens' first 3 picks, 30, 62, and 93, with no necessary trades to be described here. One realistic scenario I think that we have to accept as Ravens fans is when the Lions go to pick at 29. If a guy like Jordan Morgan is still on the board, and there's some premier offensive talent available as well. I'm talking about Xavier Worthy, Keon Coleman, Kool-Aid McKinstry on the defensive side of the ball. The Lions are not in on a tackle. Other teams know that we are, and the 49ers as well. I think there's real possibility that we're sitting there excited to possibly take a Jordan Morgan, which is my first selection here in this scenario, and another team tries to leapfrog us to do so. So, unfortunately, even if a Guyton or a Morgan is there at 29, that doesn't guarantee that we're going to get one of them until such time that the Lions make their selection. Now, the Lions are in, keep in mind, they're in on outside linebackers and corners. So the possibility exists that they want to stick and pick, but Brad Holmes is going to try to improve that roster as best he can. And if he thinks he can move back to 34 or 36 and recoup another third-round pick, then he may do so. Another thing to keep in mind, presumably Morgan or Guyton would be the pick here. Graham Barton, maybe from Duke, is another guy who can play anywhere you need him. There are teams, 49ers, Chargers, like I said, who would also be looking at those three guys in the same vein as the Ravens do. Since the Lions are looking at outside linebacker and corner, if a guy like McKinstry is there at 29 or one of the better edge rushers happens to fall that far, expect the Lions to make a pick. Don't expect them to trade back, but I think it's a very real possibility. And the only reason I describe it to you is because I have some awareness of it. There's guys that they won't pass up. Morgan, to me, is a very smooth, extremely athletic tackle. He can execute anything. He gets to the correct side on run schemes. He's strong enough, I think, to play tackle. I don't think he's a guy that's going to move to guard early. Could you do that with him if you needed to? Sure, you could, but he's extremely talented, very professional in pass pro, a great option at pick 30, if you ask me, to try to bolster the offensive line. Really, in some ways, in pass pro, reminds me of Ronnie Stanley, the pre-injury Ronnie Stanley, that is. The one caveat I will say to all of this in terms of Jordan Morgan is I have seen him stop playing on run concepts where he wins initially. So he wins off the snap with his first step, second step, gets to the correct side, and then just kind of stops competing. I had 3 games film, and when I say that I've seen this, I've seen it probably 6 times, such that his man, who he's beat initially, is able to get involved as a second arrival on the tackle, not the first guy in contact. And again, through 3 games, I saw it enough to where I was disappointed in that because he's so athletic and so impressive with everything else. That particular aspect of his game didn't meet the standard. Having said that, at pick 30, I'm taking him. And since offensive tackle is addressed in round 1, I think the draft board kind of flows a little bit better. You may have a different opinion, particularly if Keon Coleman or Xavier Worthy is there at pick 30. I understand not wanting to pass up talent like that. I think the board works out better in our favor. Guys that I think would be a great fit in the second round. Even though I do think there's a possibility the Ravens trade up, even though it's not our MO to trade up in the second round. Max Melton, Renardo Green, corners, who I think are good enough to play early, even though I know other people don't share that projection. I think the athleticism that's there is obvious on screen, and those guys bring versatility. Melton, I think, is very underrated, even compared to Green. I only had games for him against Michigan and Ohio State. I thought, to me, he looked like a Brandon Stevens clone in some ways. Rutgers' defense was really tough in those 2 games, even though they did lose both of them by a significant amount. The Michigan game was quite close up to halftime, and then a pick 6 late in the third quarter by Rutgers' offense kind of allowed Michigan to pull away. He's very adept in zone or man. Michigan did get him on a back shoulder fade for a touchdown. I thought he looked extremely tough against Ohio State, and I am including Marvin Harrison Jr. In that statement as well. 4.39 40 at the Combine. Second highest athleticism score for corners at the Combine, if I have my information right. The second round pick on a corner when you already have Brandon Stevens and you already have Marlon Humphrey, if you question that, I have no issue with that at all. I do think absolutely that the Ravens are going to be looking at guys like Melton, St. Ristel, Renardo Green as players to draft as outside corners because that position group is as deep as it's described, if you ask me. There's a very good group of DBs overall, but many of them spent time playing nickel or slot corner often, St. Ristel being one of them. Melton and Green are guys that are predominantly, I should say, outside corners. That's where they spent most of their time. Those two may be the last really high level corners on the board in round two. Other guys that I would mention here, I'll talk about later, is two local players, Kyrie Jackson, who's from PG County, and Cam Hart, who played at Good Counsel and then Notre Dame. Moving on in this first scenario, round 3 pick. Tough for me to pass up on a guy like Javon Baker at pick 93. I really am not sure how he'll still be here, though, to be honest with you, at the end of the third round. Athletically very talented, with the pads on. I know the combine scores don't look great compared to other receivers. With the pads on, he makes highlight catches and makes them look easy, for that matter, some of which are on errant throws. He had played at Alabama in 2020 and 21, and then just really took advantage of his opportunity at UCF after going through the portal. I think he's an NFL wide receiver. Is it from day one? Is it from the second year? He makes plays down the sideline. Let's do it that way. The Ravens do need a backup plan at receiver, no matter what. It's good to stack depth at wide receiver. Look at the Chiefs. They've consistently stacked depth at wide receiver every year, just tried to replenish the position, give themselves positional depth. Bateman's in his final year of his rookie contract. Not sure what the Ravens' plan is there at the time that we record this. It might be too late to get a guy like Baker at 93. His 4.5 plus, I think, at the combine, maybe 4.54, 4.55. It doesn't scare me because of the large catch radius. He really, I think, plays above the rim, and that's through contact. There's a lot of plays also in the 2 games I saw where he's open and he's just not targeted. Either the quarterback was pressured. It was against Kansas and Oklahoma, by the way, the 2 games I had. Either the quarterback was pressured or it was an errant throw, to be honest with you, or just the read, the scheme of the design of the play didn't have him as the first player targeted. I thought he gave DBs problems in both of those games. I thought there was another 8, 10, maybe more plays where he could have been targeted because he had won. I don't share the same concerns that other people have about his ability to win against press coverage. I think he's a triples hitter down the sideline by himself in the matchups that we've seen him in. I'd like to see him where his physical talent reaches its apex, meaning he can no longer win those matchups. I don't know where that is. I've seen one drop in the 2 games, and that was a diving catch against Kansas, deep down the left sideline. Didn't see much impact as a blocker, to be real with you, but I thought he was physically dominant against Oklahoma. I think this is a pretty good hall of talent, this first version that I'll give you. For me, it seems like the draft board flows better when we address tackle in the first round. Of course, that depends on who's available. Morgan in round 1, Melton or Green in round 2. Me, a guy like St. Ristel, who I think is a really good football player, is more of a slot defender, I think, possibly at the NFL level, but I could be wrong. He could end up being a great outside corner. And then Baker, a super talented receiver that I'm not even really sure will be there, would be a great addition to Flowers, Bateman, Aguilar, Andrews, and Likely. The one thing that makes both of the scenarios I'm going to describe difficult is how do you address outside linebacker? I can absolutely understand people saying they'd like to go outside linebacker at some point in one of those first 3 picks. I just don't know who the outside linebackers are at pick 93 that are immediate impact guys. And I'll be honest with you, I don't even know which outside linebacker I would pick at 30, but that's probably a topic for another video. I think the pick at 93 is the one with the highest variability in that scenario that I just presented. There's certainly other paths to get this thing done, to rebuild or resupply the roster. You don't have to do it with going offensive line or tackle first. And there's always going to be picks in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th round that are going to contribute as rookies. But this scenario, the one that I'm getting ready to describe, I think you're picking a guy in round 1 that has the athletic ability to have big impact early, even though others would clearly disagree. And that's if the Ravens are able to go wide receiver and take Keon Coleman at pick 30. It is a big need, if you ask me, to future-proof the position, continue to reload it there compared to the first scenario, Javon Baker versus Keon Coleman. You're taking one in the third round and one in the first. It gives you that additional year, obviously, to have the option to extend him. The problem here for me is the tackles that will be available at 62. I guess at that point, picking at 62, you're on the 10th, 11th, or maybe 12th best tackle in the draft, or the 12th pick there, if you will. At 30, you could still be taking the 6th, 7th, or 8th with how many offensive tackles are projected to be taken in this draft. Coleman at 30, I think, is the right place for his talent level. I know other people are projecting him at 45, 48, 50, and who knows, maybe that's where he'll end up going. I think there's enough film there to see him making plays against high-level competition in two different conferences, such that there's justification you could sell me that Keon Coleman would be worth the pick at pick 30. With the other needs that are available, I think the first scenario presents a better opportunity for improving the roster quicker, but I would love to get a talent like Keon Coleman in the building, on the roster for 4 or 5 years. Second aspect to this scenario is Patrick Paul. The quality of tackle that you're going to get in someone like this perhaps doesn't meet the level of Morgan, Guyton, and others who might be there at 30. Nonetheless, looks like a really solid player. I've only watched 2 Houston games on offense. I really do like Keon Coleman a lot at 30. I'm not sure this is the right strategy because of the manner in which you end up addressing the offensive line gets pushed down the board, and there's so many good tackles. It seems like the right way to go. The first scenario, at least particularly from the standpoint of how many target shares there will be for this Ravens offense in 2024. With Zay Flowers, Mark Andrews being there along with Bateman, Aguilar likely, not even to mention the signing of Derrick Henry, who I still believe is the best free agent signing in the entire league, and then having Lamar Jackson at quarterback. O-line quality, I think, is the position that needs to be addressed. Nonetheless, I like to present different scenarios, and I understand that people will have different opinions. Now, here's where this one gets kind of wonky, I guess. With the third round pick here, the interesting element to me is when you're trying to take some of the corners and you end up at the tier or level of guys like the two that I have displayed here. I mentioned them earlier. They're both local guys. Cam Hart from Notre Dame played at Good Counsel, and then Kyrie Jackson finished at Oregon. He's a PG County guy, played at Wise. If you don't know anything about Wise, it's an amazing high school football program. These guys, I think, in this scenario might be too early, too soon for them versus Javon Baker, who I don't know will even be there at pick 93. These two guys will. And that's where the strength of this particular scenario, I think, does make sense. Because you can get a good corner, I think, who's a developmental corner, can play behind Humphrey and Brandon Stevens for a year or two, because Humphrey is signed for 2 more years. We'd have to figure out a way to extend Brandon Stevens and not break the bank. These guys and others in that 85 to 105 range will be there. The quality of corner that you get in a Max Melton or a Renardo Green or even a Sane Riestel at 62, is it significantly better than some of these guys and others who will be there? I don't know. That's up to you to decide. I think the trickle-down effects of the way the draft works out, the Ravens don't have all the control of. If someone decides to trade up to 29 to take a Morgan or a Guyton, if they're the last tackle standing in that situation, then the projection for the rest of the draft really goes haywire, if you ask me. This second version is not the one that I would necessarily advocate for, but I could certainly see it happening on draft night because of all the variables that are there, number one, and the number of positions that we all think as fans the Ravens really need to address. Now, maybe the front office sees things differently. They certainly did last year with Brandon Stevens in terms of corner, and they were right. So perhaps they have more trust in Owe and Ojabo than we do. Perhaps they have more trust in Makari and Falele and others on the offensive line than we do. Nonetheless, their job, and I think they're serious about it, is to try to resupply or restock each position as best they can to create another overwhelming roster in 2024 like they did last year. One element that I mentioned earlier that I think I just want to touch on one more time is the Ravens appear to be in a perfect spot to take a high level tackle at 30, given how much talent there is there. As a result of that, that could cause other teams to trade up. I mentioned the Lions as a specific trade partner there with the 49ers, the Chargers, among others, depending on what the Chargers do earlier in the draft. If you ask me, the Ravens have to have a contingency plan, and I think that has to include a way to trade back into the 45 to 55 range prior to our second selection at pick 62. If we could figure out a way to do that without giving up pick 62, well, that would be fantastic. I don't think that's realistic, however. The other option is to trade back into the 65 to 75 range without giving up pick 62, which sounds more realistic. The good thing is that the roster here already includes a lot of depth. There's serious offensive firepower at the skill positions: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. We've got great talent there. And then there's a significant number of draft picks in this draft and next year to help the Ravens move around the board as they need to on draft night. I don't think you'll see a trade by the Ravens on night or day one. Others have talked about it. I don't believe you will. I think it'll happen on day 2 or day 3, if at all. Significant number of draft prospect videos that I've put out or tried to focus on the corner position, some outside linebacker. There's certain players that I feel like are a better fit for where the Ravens will be selecting as opposed to others. If you're interested, follow me on Twitter or Patreon. I try to put out some of those prospect videos and show some of the techniques or things that I think makes those players stand out versus others. As an aside, Coach Evans at Sit the Tally Films and EA or Ed Growlin, those two guys are putting out consistent draft film. If you want to check that out on YouTube, feel free. I'll try to link some of their stuff up in the description. Appreciate you guys' time. Let me know what you think in the comment section of the 2 options that I presented here. Not locked into the particular players. These are ranges or types of players that will be available in that range, I should say. I think the Ravens' options to improve the roster are significant. They're in great position, but the signing of Clowney to another team, Carolina in this case, he's returning home basically, puts the Ravens in a position where they have to improve a 4th spot, outside linebacker, D-end, or edge, along with corner, offensive line, and wide receiver. Appreciate you guys' time. If you think other Ravens fans would enjoy this video, this draft projection, then please consider grabbing a link to this, sharing it out on social media to help this content get more reach.